All right. Excellent to see everybody this morning. I hope that you've all had a lovely weekend. So yeah, the big move today is to start in on our natural deduction systems. So in particular, here's the way that this class is going to go. I want to start by telling you a little bit about what natural deduction is very generally and why we might be interested in engaging with it. And then the rest of this class is going to be me throwing a bunch of rules at you. You can kind of think about it as me trying to teach you a very complicated board game. And for better or for worse, the way that I have found to do it best is to give you all of the rules up front, and then we go through in the tutorials how exactly each one kind of goes to get a little bit more familiar with it. It is going to be a little bit of information overload, right? Because I'm going to give you a whole bunch of rules, but we'll try and make it clear how each one works, right? And frame it all as we go along. So that's the plan. By the end of it, you will have all of the rules for natural deduction for truth functional logic. And this will then serve as a stepping stone for what we want to do afterwards, which is going to be natural deduction for first order logic, right? For FOL. So let's get started with the general idea. What is natural deduction? Now, when we're thinking about arguments for TFL, you've already got a really good tool for assessing them. And the great tool for assessing TFL arguments are truth tables, right? You did a bunch of these in the midterm. We talked about them a lot in the first half of the class. And truth tables are great, but they are a brute force instrument, right? They're blunt. They basically just kind of hammer an argument, and they show you if there's going to be a situation where we can make the premises true and conclusion false, and they will show you if there is no such situation. But they have limitations. One limitation, just to take the second problem here, is entirely practical. Sometimes the truth table is going to be hideous to do just because there's so many atoms. Here's a very jokey argument. It is in fact valid, right? But my God, would the truth table be a beast? Yeah. But the trick is, of course, right, what we need to do is to show that in every valuation, right, that's the problem. Right? And of course, then we've got to go through a whole slew of ones that really aren't very exciting. But the more interesting issue is that truth tables are a blunt instrument, right? They don't provide what we might call insight. That is, they can show you that an argument's valid or invalid, but when the argument's valid, they don't show you why. So they don't show you how it is that you can go from the truth of the premises to the truth of the conclusion. And that's problematic if you're interested in the kind of rationale, right? You actually want to know why the argument works, not just that it does. There's an even bigger issue lurking, and this is the real reason. When we consider FOL arguments, we don't even have a tool to show that they are valid, because all we can do with interpretations is produce countermodels. We can show that FOL arguments are invalid when they are. We don't have a tool yet to show that they are valid. We'll need some tool that lets us think about all possible interpretations. And that's what we're going to try and build to. So one big reason to take a different approach is to try and gain some kind of insight into how it is that premises support conclusion when you have a valid argument. And another one is just, let's give us a tool that will actually let us do all of the jobs for FOL. So this is where we're going to get natural deduction. Natural deduction systems represent idealized models of patterns of actual reasoning. That is, if you like, a natural deduction system represents how an idealized reasoner would go from premises to conclusion. The aim is to show you how an argument's valid by giving you a story. We'll have some very basic, we'll call them inference rules, and a natural deduction proof is going to give you a map that walks you from the premises to the conclusion with all of these rules. So the upshot is you know how it is that the premises support the conclusion, not just that they do. In this way, natural deduction systems are meant to do a bunch of things. To clarify the form and structure of our logical reasoning, because a good natural deduction proof will show you the path of reasoning that a reasoner would take to go from premises to conclusion. They describe the appropriate means of justifying a conclusion, again, showing you how the premises support it. They demonstrate how the inference rules that we implicitly, or at least should implicitly, use in our everyday reasoning. Right? And here's a really cool thing. We're going to do all of this purely syntactically. So we will never have to be concerned with whether the sentences we're playing around with are true or false. We're just going to think about it as, does this string of symbols allow us to generate this next string of symbols? And that's going to be very handy when we think about FOL. It's not really super important for TFL. Now, one thing to note, when I'm presenting this stuff, I will talk loosely. I will say things like, okay, given that we know this is true, what can we get from it? But remember, that's just a way to kind of get a grip on what we're doing. Because importantly, when we're actually playing with natural deduction systems, we don't care about truth and falsity. It's just not something that enters into our concern. It's just, do we have this string? What kind of string can we generate? Okay. So what do we do with natural deduction systems? I already gave the game away. We build proofs. We build formal proofs. And a formal proof is literally just a structure of sentences, right? It starts with some that are marked as premises or assumptions. It has a last line, which is the conclusion, and it's going to have some rules or indications to show you how you're getting from the premises down to the conclusion. The core of our natural deduction system is going to be, as I mentioned earlier, inference rules. These inference rules are going to relate, at least for TFL, to the connectives. When we get to FOL, we're going to have all the rules for the connectives, and then we're going to get some new ones that deal with the quantifiers and with identity. Now, when we think about these rules, there's basically two types. There's what we'll call introduction rules and elimination rules. Introduction rules introduce a sentence featuring the associated operator. So, for example, conjunction introduction gives us a sentence with conjunction as its main operator. Disjunction introduction gives us a sentence with disjunction as its main operator. Introduction adds the kind of connective we want. Elimination rules, on the other hand, are, to be honest, very badly named. They're not really elimination rules, they're more exploitation rules. They're use rules. Elimination rules use a sentence featuring the associated operator to let us generate some sentence. It may be a sentence featuring that same operator, or it may not. The important thing is introduction rules always give us a sentence with the associated connective or operator. Elimination rules always use a sentence with the associated connective or operator. This will get a little bit clearer as we spell out the rules, but just remember. So you'll note when we write them down, we're going to have things like I rules and E rules. That's just another way to write this, right? And for each connective, there's going to be an introduction and an elimination rule. The introduction rule gives us a sentence with that connective. The elimination rule uses a sentence featuring that connective. Okay. Cool. All of the rules are going to be something along these lines. So let's look at what a natural deduction proof looks like so we can get a kind of sense of how this is going to go. First, let's take a really simple TFL argument. And let's ask, valid, invalid? Let's think. Here's an easy way to check. If we make the premises true, could we construct the conclusion? Yeah, we could, right? So here's how we could go, right? From the two premises, we know, if we're assuming they're true, that A conjunction B is true. If A conjunction B is true, what has to be true? A and B both have to be true, right? Conjunctions are hard to please, so both conjuncts would have to be true, right? So from A conjunction B, we know that A, and we also know that B. Now let's take B for a second. If we know that B, and we've assumed that B conditional C is true, because we're assuming that the premises are all true, what truth value would C have to have? It has to be true, right? Because if the conditional is true and the antecedent of the conditional is true, the only way for that to happen is if the consequent is true as well. So from B and the second premise, we know that C. So now we know that A is true and that C is true. So it's real damn easy to then go, cool, A conjunction C is true. Bang, we have just derived the conclusion. Now our proofs, the natural deduction proofs, are going to take that reasoning I just walked through and formally express it. Here's how we do it. We start by listing all of our premises, all of our assumptions. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these as true for the sake of the proof. We list them vertically, we number them. Once we've listed all of them, we draw a horizontal line underneath. This horizontal line underneath we can call our assumption line. Everything above the assumption line we are taking for given, right? We're taking it to be true for the sake of this proof. We don't care if it is true or false, we're just taking it as our premises for what we're going to do. Everything below the line is going to be derived or an additional assumption. So we list them, we draw our horizontal line, okay? Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a vertical line. And this vertical line is our proof line. It's going to start with the first premise, drop all the way down, and it's going to end with the conclusion. So the last line to be written on our proof line, in this case, is going to be C conjunction A, right? It's the result we want to get to. As our proof grows, we will extend the line. And every sentence that we add, we number. So everything below the assumption line, as I said, is going to be something derived, and it will be derived via the application of an inference rule. Or it will be a new assumption. Let's leave the second one for now. Let's just think about deriving using an inference rule. So, in the informal presentation of the argument, remember I said, hey, if one is true, what do we know? If one is true and one is a conjunction, we know that both conjuncts have to be true. So here's what we can do. We can immediately derive one of the conjuncts. We take the conjunction, we break it in half, and we get the conjunct we want. What rule do I use here? I used what I will call conjunction elimination. I used the conjunction in one, to derive some sentence. Right? I took the conjunction that was in sentence 1 and I broke it and I got a conjunct. I eliminated that conjunction. So what we do as we go along is we cite the rule we've used, right? Conjunction elimination. In this point, I exploited the conjunction in 1 to get one of the conjuncts. And I cite what sentence or sentences my rule used. Right? I used 1 to get one of its conjuncts. Cool. So and what rule did I use to get it? I used conjunction elimination. So far, so good? Yes, please. Exactly. So we're going to have two kinds of rules. There'll be E rules and I rules. E rules eliminate. I rules, as you can probably guess, introduce. So, okay. Now remember, first thing I did, I got A through conjunction elimination. What's my next move going to be? What am I going to do at line 4? I want B. And what rule am I going to use to get B? I'm going to use conjunction elimination again. Here's the thing. If you use a rule on a sentence, it's not like it's used up. It's still there. So I can do it again, and I can get B through conjunction elimination on sentence 1. I take the conjunction, I break it, and this time I get the other conjunct. All right. Note again, as we go along, as more sentences are added, we number them. We always indicate what rule we've used and what sentences we applied the rule to. Because what is this listing over here giving us? It's giving you a map. It's showing you, hey, here's the reasoning steps you could take to go from what was before to get to me. Okay, now, what are we going to do at line 5? Well, remember in the informal description that I gave you, we said, if the conditional is true and the antecedent is true, what can we derive? We can get the consequent, right? If we have B conditional C and we have derived B, that is, if we know the conditional is true and we know the antecedent of the conditional is true, we can conclude the consequent of the conditional is true. So we can get C. And note, in this case, the rule I've used, we'll call it conditional elimination. Because what we're doing is we're using the conditional in line 2. But in this case, I didn't just use the conditional. I needed the conditional and the antecedent to get the consequent. So I cite both the conditional and the antecedent and derive the consequent from the conditional. Yes? So importantly, again, we're talking kind of loosely as if it's true. What we really mean is that it's on our proof line, right? In this case, right, if we just had the conditional, we couldn't get the consequent. So let's think about that. Why is it if we just had the conditional, we couldn't get the consequent? Yeah, the consequent could be true or false, and the conditional could still be true either way, right? In this case, what we're doing, by knowing that the antecedent and the conditional are true, is we're forced into a situation where the consequent has to be true. Okay, so far so good. I've got A and I've got C. Now what's the last step that's going to bring me to the conclusion? I take the sentence A, I take the sentence C, and I jam them together with conjunction. So this is where we're going to use an I rule, conjunction introduction. Conjunction introduction gives us a conjunction. It introduces that operator, and we cite the two sentences that we're sticking together with a conjunction.
Are there a lot of premises in any order?
Yes, absolutely. Right? So the thing to note is that this kind of stuff, there's going to be 1,000 ways to go. As long as they're there, I don't care. So again, note what we're doing every time. We're citing the rule we've used, the sentences we're using. Yeah.
Can you explain again why we're adding numbers?
Good. So what the numbers are doing is telling us which sentences we're applying our rules to. So just take our last one, right? Our last one where we added the conditional. We need to cite what are the two lines that we're taking as our conjuncts. So I'm taking line 5 and I'm taking line 3, and those are my two conjuncts that I'm sticking together. Similarly, for line 5, how did I get line 5? I used conditional elimination, and I used the conditional in line 2, and the antecedent in line 4. So the numbers are telling us which line did you use. Again, it's part of a roadmap saying what rule and who did you use it on. Cool. So here you go. This is our first natural deduction proof, right? The whole idea here is actually straightforward. It is talking through and laying out the steps you would use to go from premise to conclusion. The trick is going to be knowing the rules that let you do that. But the general process is straightforward. We have premises, we apply rules to derive sentences, we keep working until you've derived the conclusion. Every step along the way, you're going to indicate where the sentence came from. Rule, sentences that you applied to get there. Cool? Okay. So before we go anywhere else, something I want to tell you. As I said, I'm going to throw all of the rules for TFL at you today. I do not expect you to memorize these. As part of the exam, you will get a cheat sheet that has all of the rules for TFL and all of the rules for FOL. But of course, the cheat sheet's fucking useless unless you understand how to read and apply the rules. So while I don't expect you to memorize them, I do expect you to at least know how to use them. And we're going to go through all of them. But again, that's something to note. So let's talk about our first few rules. We've actually already seen the ones that I want to talk about. The ones to start are our simplest ones. These are conjunction, introduction, and elimination, and conditional elimination. So, here's our first rule, conjunction introduction. Right? Conjunction introduction says if you have two sentences on a line, staying on that same line, you can introduce their conjunction. Note, I'm presenting this in as generic a way as possible. So both of these sentences might be an assumption, so they might be above your assumption line. Both of them might be sentences you've derived. Maybe one's an assumption and one's derived. Doesn't matter. They can be presented in any order. They can be presented with as many lines in between as you want. All that matters is if you have a sentence and another sentence on a line, you can build their conjunction while staying on that same line. I'm going to present all the rules in this general way. But note, in every case, it doesn't matter if some or all of the sentences to be used are assumptions or derived. Doesn't matter if there's a bunch of lines in between, right? This is just a general way to present these. Also note that these are in my sexy squash font. So A and B could be as simple or as complex as we want. They could be atoms. They could be really, really, really long sentences. Doesn't matter. If you have both, you can build their conjunction. Cool on the first one. Note, right? A very simple thing. It's useful when we're citing the lines we're doing. cite them in the order that you want to build. So if you want the conjunction with and as the first one, cite and as the first one. Because remember here, we're not dealing with sentences that are true or false, we're dealing with strings, symbols. So B conjunction A is a different string than A conjunction B. Now between friends, I'm not going to be super duper picky about this. If you put the right numbers and the exam, that's fine, even if it's not in the same order, but it's good to get in good habits. So conjunction introduction gives us a conjunction. Conjunction elimination uses a conjunction. Conjunction elimination says if you have a sentence with conjunction as its main operator, you can get one of the conjuncts. Note, if you want both conjuncts, you got to use the rule twice. We already saw that because that's what we did in our practice proof. So here, you just cite the conjunction you're using, and you derive one of the conjuncts. Again, these could be as simple or as complex as you like. Importantly, conjunction elimination, just like all of our elimination rules, only applies to sentences where the relevant connective is the main operator. So if you know this conjunction is underneath a conditional, you can't use conjunction elimination on it. You've got to get rid of the conditional first to get to the conjunction. Cool? Look at that. We've already got 1 out of the 5 connectives done. Our next one is conditional elimination. Oh, I forgot. Here's a really simple and silly proof using conjunction elimination and introduction. It's just one to show you, hey, sometimes even these very, very simple rules are helpful. Obviously, this is kind of a silly proof, but it's still a neat proof. And it would have been a very hideous truth table. Okay, so coming back. Conditional elimination, our third rule here. Conditional elimination is the one that I've already taught you. If you have a conditional on your proof line, and you have the antecedent of a conditional on your proof line, you can derive the consequent. What do you cite? You cite the conditional and the antecedent. What does it give you? It gives you the consequent of the conditional. Note, it's not going to work if you just have the conditional. It's not going to work if you just have the antecedent. You've got to have both. Okay. It's also worth noting, yeah.
So A relationship A are given. A is given, right?
It could be given, it could be something we've derived, right? Again, remember that it doesn't matter if some or all of these are assumptions or some or all of these are sentences we've derived. What matters is that we've got these sentences on our line one way or the other.
So, like, if we're there, we're taking them as true. If they're there, we're taking them as true.
In a sense, right? That's kind of the way we can think about it. Again, strictly speaking, that's not quite right because we don't want to think about it in terms of true or false, but it's not really going to hurt to do that, right? You can loosely think about it as if it's on the proof line, we're taking it as true for this proof.
Can we say that then in terms of conditional, that we're able to drive A, and that means we are also able to drive B?
That's basically what this is saying, right? If we know that if A, then B,
Yeah.
and if A,
Then
it must be B. Okay. Note, importantly, the order of these don't matter. So it might be such that you have the antecedent and then you get the conditional. Cool, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you have both of those things. You need the conditional, you need the antecedent, it gives you the consequent. All right, yes?
If you use the sentence, for example, you use and then you use it again.
Absolutely. Whenever you use a sentence, it's not like it goes away. It is still on the line. Right? You don't erase it. And remember, all of these rules say, if this is on the line, then you can use it. just like we did before, right? Remember with conjunction? I used conjunction elimination on A conjunction C to get both A and to get C. You can use a sentence as many times as you want. Okay. These are the three initial rules. If we've got what we've got so far, we're doing all right. Now we're going to add a complication. But before we talk about the complication, are there any other questions on these first three? Feel sort of okay with them? All right. Now, in order to understand the next collection of rules, we need to talk about this idea. So remember I said everything below the assumption line is either a sentence we're going to derive or a new assumption. When we talk about adding a new assumption, we don't mean that it's going to sneak back in above our assumption line. Instead, what we're going to do is we will take on additional assumptions, and to make a good exhibit joke, we'll do a proof within our proof. This proof within our proof is going to start with the sentence we want as our additional assumption, and it will get to some result. But importantly, we then need to close off that additional proof. To give you an idea, let's talk about this argument. Right? So we have one premise, we have sentence A, and our conclusion. If B, then A conjunction B. Right? And this argument's valid. Right? If we assume A is true, then it's very easy to show that this conditional must also be true. So, how would we show it, right? We start, just like always, we write our premise down, we number it, we draw our assumption line, we drop our proof line. Now, what's the rationale? Well, here's the idea. Right? If B was true, since we've already assumed A, we would then be able to generate A conjunction B, right? If B was also true, since we've assumed A, we could get A conjunction B. So that would show us that if B, then A conjunction B. So how do we do that if B were true? What we do is we open a proof within our proof. We'll call these subproofs. Subproofs still are numbered, but what we do is we start a new proof line one step to the right. This new proof opens with the additional assumption sentence. It's always just one sentence. And we're now going to be operating on this subproof line. So anything that we derive is not going to be in our main proof line, the one on the left, but it's going to be on this subproof line underneath B. And the idea here is, what could we show if we also had this other toy to play with? So we can ask, what can we derive at line 3? Here's the neat thing. If you're in a subproof, you have everything that's on your subproof line and everything that's to the left. So right now, for us at line 3, we have access, if you like, to sentence 2 and to sentence 1. So we can take those two and we can jam them together with conjunction introduction to give us A conjunction B. Right? And we use conjunction introduction, we cite the sentences. Now here's the nice thing, okay? Our subproof has done its job. Our subproof shows that if B were true, then A conjunction B would follow. So what we're going to do now is we are going to ditch it. We close the subproof, we move back to our main proof line. So what do we mean by that? We stop drawing the subproof line and we move back to writing on the main proof line. Now it's worth noting, there's only a few rules that will let us derive something one line to the left. There's only a few Beyonce rules. That will let us drag something to the left. Importantly, when we close the subproof and we move over, everything in the subproof is dead. We can't talk to it anymore. We can't use it. Individual lines in the subproof are cut off. They are verboten. But we can use the whole subproof. The whole subproof shows you something. It shows you what would happen if B were true. So what we can do at line 4 is we can introduce a conditional. We can say, hey, if B were true, then we could get the conjunction. So that tells us on the main line that B, conditional, conjunction.
So in we discharge, in B insert line in discharge after.
So importantly, all that we discharge is our commitment to the additional assumption. And when we do that, it means that the individual lines inside that subproof are inaccessible to us now. So we can't use line 3. We can't use line 2. We can use the whole subproof. And note, this is what our rule does. This conditional introduction rule tells us don't look at individual lines, look at everything in between these two lines. In this case, it's only the 2, but it could have been longer. It says go look at the subproof that starts in line 2 and ends in line 3. It will show you that if B were true, you can get to this conjunction. So at this point, right, when we close the subproof and move back to the main proof line, individual lines in here are inaccessible, but the whole subproof can be used, can be cited.
So let's say that if the subproof was going until like 8, would have been the citation be 2, 8?
2 through 8. Note that the difference here, in the usual rules, right, we have the 1, 2 that's telling you look at these 2 lines. With the dash in between, it's telling you go look at all of these lines. Go look at this range.
So we're basically referencing to what we derived from that subproof.
Exactly. It's saying, hey, go look at this subproof. Go look at this subproof. In these ones, it's saying go look at these 2 lines. In this one, it's saying go look at this whole subproof. That's what it's saying. Right? Again, it's a map. It tells you where to look and what rules were used.
So from subproof, can you learn
No. Importantly, there's only a few rules that will let you derive something from the subproof. We're going to talk through them. But again, to stress, yes, please.
If we want to, shouldn't we use eliminates to get to B alone?
So here's the funny thing. When we open a subproof, when we add an additional assumption, that's going to be one of the only times, in fact, it is the only time where you get a sentence without using a rule. Because it's just like what we have when we're opening our proofs, right, for our assumptions. We don't need a rule to give us the assumptions. Similarly, we don't need a rule to give us the additional assumption we're opening the subproof with. But importantly, by the end, we have to decommit from that additional assumption. That's what it is when we close the subproof line and go back to the main proof. So we don't need a rule there because we're just sort of taking it for a second as given. It's a good question. Okay. Again, to stress, we cannot do something like this, right? Once we've closed the subproof, the lines inside it are inaccessible to us, so we can't try and use them again. Right? This is bad. This is bad because when we close this subproof, lines 2 and 3 are gone. the subproof becomes a black box. We cannot see what those lines were. So we cannot make this move. That's a no-no. Okay. So, some things to note about subproofs. You can always open a new subproof. You just spot whatever you want as your additional assumption. You can also open subproofs inside subproofs. Again, thank you, exhibit. You can also open a subproof, do some things, close it, and get nothing out of it. There's no problem with just doing extra steps that don't help you. But importantly, they don't help you. So it's not like it's bad, but it's just not useful. And one thing that we will have is if we have multiple subproofs, the same rules apply. You open a subproof by going one line to the right with your initial sentence. By the end, you'll need to close it and step one line to the left. And importantly, the rules we're going to have that let you derive something from a subproof only let you go one line to the left. There's never going to be a rule that lets you go from a subproof all the way out, because we're going to be very baby stepping, right? Little steps for every inference. Okay. How are we doing for time? Okay. I want to talk to you about conditional introduction and the two rules for the biconditional, and then we'll take our break, okay? So we know conditional elimination. Conditional elimination was if you have the conditional and the antecedent, you can get the consequent. Conditional introduction is this rule that we used right here. So generically, conditional introduction says you can introduce conditional sexy swash font A, conditional sexy swash font B, if and only if there's a subproof that starts with sexy swash font A as your additional assumption and ends in sexy swash font B. That's just a really long-winded way to say if there's a subproof that starts with A and ends in B. Note, this subproof can be as long or as short as you need it to be. In the one that we did just a second ago, it was only 2 lines. We mentioned earlier it could have been, 7 or 8 lines. That's no problem. To introduce a conditional, you need to have a subproof that starts with your antecedent and ends with your consequent. And what it lets you do is generate the conditional one line to the left of wherever you did your subproof. Okay. Because again, what is the subproof showing? The subproof shows if this, then we can get to that. If A, then I can get to B. Yeah.
For opening subproof, in this case, it was just an adder. Can it be a sentence?
It can be. So your opening assumption for a subproof can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be.
Okay.
So it can be an atomic sentence. It can be a huge conjunction, a conditional, a negated sentence, whatever you want.
Okay.
Right? There are no restrictions there. Okay. So conditional introduction, you need a subproof, starts with antecedent, ends with conclusion. Biconditional is just conditional twice. Right? To get the biconditional, what you need is 2 subproofs. One that starts with the left and ends with the right, and one that starts with the right and ends with the left. Effectively, right, it's just literally introducing the conditional both ways. So if you know how to do conditional introduction, you can do bi. Yeah.
So actually, it doesn't matter where is A application be. Like, for example, M is 1, P is 4, and Q can be 10 or 11.
Doesn't matter. The gaps here can be as big as we want. These subproofs can be as long as we want. Just in this case, you got to have both subproofs. So biconditional introduction is literally just conditional introduction twice. And biconditional elimination is going to be conditional elimination, one of the two directions. So if you have a biconditional and you have one of the sides, you can derive the other side. So if you have the left, you get the right. If you have the right, you get the left. Again, it makes sense. If you know how to do conditional elimination, you know how to do biconditional elimination. It's just that the arrow goes both directions. So far, right, we've got the rules for conjunction, introduction and elimination, and we've got the rules for the conditional, introduction, elimination, and for the biconditional, introduction, elimination. We've got two left, the disjunction and negation. Disjunction has a really easy introduction rule and an absolutely fucking heinous elimination rule. And that's all because disjunction is so easy to make true. The thing to note, what these rules do, if you're struggling to get a grip on how these rules work, is remember what the connectives express, right? The conditional expresses if-then. So when we do something like biconditional introduction, for example, which is just conditional introduction twice, the subproof is showing you if-then. If sexy swash font A, then sexy swash font B. It's just showing you. If you assume A, then you can derive B. And the biconditional just does that both directions. The same thing with the elimination rule, right? The elimination rule works because the biconditional requires both sides to have the same truth value. So if you know that this side is true, the other side must also be true, and vice versa. Again, if you've got a grip on how these connectives work from back when we were doing truth tables, just think about how these rules are mapping those. Okay. Questions so far? You feeling okay? Again, I know it's weird if you've never done anything like this. Do not panic. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to talk about them and do a bunch of these. This is very much the case where you are going to learn the most here by actually trying to do some of the proofs. Right? Okay, so we're at 35. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 45 and we'll pick up with the rest. All right, take a break.